Filthy liar Jasmine Crockett. The words thundered across Congress, spat out by President Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. In that very chamber, 435 members of the House and 100 senators froze in stunned silence. Over 80 million Americans were glued to their screens, watching a president publicly humiliate a congresswoman. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She stood alone, a black woman facing the full weight of power and privilege. In a country where 1 in 3 black Americans have faced discrimination inside government institutions, her presence was more than symbolic. It was defiance itself. Trump smirked, believing he could crush her spirit with just 4 words. Yet what he didn't know was that Jasmine held something far more dangerous than his insults: the truth. And in less than 9 seconds, that truth would shatter his legacy forever. The Capitol dome glistened under the late afternoon sun, but inside its marble halls, shadows stretched long and heavy. It was no ordinary session. It was history unfolding, live, raw, unfiltered. Every seat in the House chamber was filled, not just by lawmakers, but by fear, anticipation, and the weight of a nation divided. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low hum of tension, like the final moments before a storm tears the sky apart. The sergeant-at-arms voice cut through the silence. All rise for the President of the United States. And then he entered. Donald Trump, 47th President, strode through the chamber doors flanked by a wall of Secret Service agents. His chin was tilted upward, eyes gleaming with arrogance, his mouth twisted into that familiar smirk that millions had come to know, and millions more had come to despise. Every camera swiveled, every lens drank in his presence. To his supporters, he was power incarnate. To his enemies, he was a storm in human form. Loud, destructive, merciless. He took each step slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment as though the chamber itself was his stage and the world his captive audience. The echo of his footsteps ricocheted against the marble walls, pounding like drums of war. He paused at the front, turning his head just slightly, letting his gaze sweep across the chamber. Democrats stiffened, Republicans nodded. No one spoke. No one dared. Trump's hand slammed down on the podium. "This," he growled, his voice booming through the chamber, "is my Congress." The words were not protocol. They were not tradition. They were a declaration of dominance. Gasps rose from the chamber, but he ignored them. He leaned forward, lips curling. "Filthy liar, Jasmine Crockett," he spat again, dragging her name across the floor like mud. The insult hung heavy, acidic, filling the silence with venom. But before the chamber could collapse under his words, she appeared, Jasmine Crockett. She walked in alone, no entourage, no wall of protection, just herself, steady and unbroken. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing like the strike of a gavel. Eyes turned, whispers spread, cameras snapped to her face. There was no smirk, no theatrics, only fire. Her gaze locked on Trump, and for the briefest moment, the entire chamber vanished. It was just the two of them, power versus defiance, arrogance versus truth. She reached her seat and paused, letting the silence stretch. The chamber held its breath, and then she looked up. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the tension like steel. "You may command armies, Mr. President. You may own this chamber, but you will never own the truth." A murmur rippled across the room. Some gasped. Others leaned forward, captivated. For the first time that day, Trump blinked. The atmosphere thickened. The invisible war lines had been drawn. Trump sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think the people want you? You think they'll stand with you against me?" Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own weapon, sharper than any blade. The cameras zoomed in, the feed transmitting her defiance into millions of homes across the nation. Over 80 million Americans were watching, and at that moment, the tide shifted ever so slightly. But the storm was far from over. Trump leaned back, resting one hand on the podium, as if daring her to step further. His grin widened, shark-like. "You'll regret this, Crockett. Before tonight is over, you'll beg to be forgotten." The chamber fell silent again. as though the air itself recoiled. It was intimidation at its purest, a man wielding the full shadow of presidential power to crush a single woman. And yet Jasmine did not falter. She stood, her hands steady on the desk, her eyes never leaving his. Her voice rang out, calm but thunderous in its conviction. "No, Mr. President, tonight is not about me. Tonight is about every man, woman, and child who has suffered because power has always silenced the truth. Tonight, Congress will hear what you've tried to bury." The chamber erupted in whispers and gasps, the kind that spoke of shock, but also of awakening. Jasmine's words had pierced the veil of fear, and suddenly the room felt alive with a current no one could ignore. Trump's face hardened. The smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. For the first time, his eyes betrayed him. Behind the anger, behind the bravado, there was something else, fear, and the nation saw it. The networks replayed her words in real time, captions flashing across millions of screens. Social media ignited like wildfire. Crockett versus Trump. Truth versus power. The gathering storm. But inside the chamber, there was no social media, no trending hashtags, only silence. Silence in the slow, deliberate rise of Jasmine Crockett as she prepared to speak again. The president's fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and across from him, Jasmine drew in a breath, her fire burning brighter. History was watching. The storm had begun. And then Donald Trump's voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. "Today," he thundered, pounding the podium with a fist that rattled the microphone, "I put an end to every charade against my lawful government." The sound reverberated off marble columns, shaking not just the room, but the fragile hearts of those sitting inside it. Gasps fluttered like moths in the silence, but no one dared to interrupt. Trump straightened, his chest puffed, his shoulders squared like a conquering emperor. The Congress chamber was no longer Congress. It was his theater, his stage, his circus. He swept a hand across the room, fingers stabbing toward the faces of lawmakers who shrank back in their seats. "You think you can resist me? You think you can disgrace me in front of the American people?" His voice lowered, slow and venomous, each word sinking into the bones of the room. "Not today, not in my house." Silence followed, thick, suffocating silence. Rows of lawmakers sat motionless, their hands folded tightly, eyes darting nervously. Some exchanged glances, as if asking silently, "Should we speak? Should we move?" But no one did. Fear had frozen them. They knew Trump wasn't just speaking to Jasmine Crockett. He was speaking to all of them, to anyone who had dared to whisper against him, anyone who had ever doubted his grip. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every twitch of his mouth, every vein that pulsed along his temple. This wasn't the polished speech of a president. It was the roar of a man who had tasted absolute power and refused to let it go. He leaned forward, gripping the podium with white knuckles. "The people chose me. The Constitution bows to me. And tonight, this charade ends." The chamber stirred. A cough, a shuffle of papers, the uneasy shifting of bodies. But still no one raised a voice, because his presence was a weight pressing down on them, crushing dissent before it could even take form. For a moment it seemed he had succeeded, that the fear he injected was enough to smother every spark of resistance. And then his eyes found Jasmine Crockett. She sat motionless, hands folded, back straight. She did not flinch under his stare. If anything, her stillness was louder than the president's rage. Trump sneered, his lips curling. "You sit there like a saint, Jasmine Crockett, but I know who you are. I know the lies you tell. I know the weakness you hide." The words slashed across the chamber, heavy with venom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed closer. The nation was being fed a spectacle of humiliation. He slammed his fist again, rattling the chamber. "Don't think your skin color makes you untouchable. Don't think your speeches make you powerful. You are nothing without this circus protecting you." A collective gasp swept through the chamber. The words had crossed an invisible line, slicing deep into the history of injustice that haunted America's soul. But Trump didn't stop. He fed on the silence, on the gasps, on the paralyzing fear. He raised his voice again, louder, harder. For too long, traitors have hidden behind the veil of justice, pretending to fight for the people. But I am the people. I am their voice, their power, their will. The chamber shook with the force of his voice. It wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a declaration of war. Outside, protesters clashed with barricades, their chants muffled but urgent. Inside, the chamber was a tomb of silence, every breath held hostage. Trump's shadow stretched across the floor as he leaned further forward, spitting each word like a bullet. And if any of you, think you can rise against me, then let tonight be your warning. The storm you fear is me. The last word exploded, hanging in the air like smoke after cannon fire. Lawmakers shrank further. Some lowered their heads. Others tapped nervous fingers on wooden desks. The fear was visible, crawling across their faces like cracks in glass. But one face remained unbroken. Jasmine Crockett. She sat still, her eyes fixed on him, her silence more defiant than any outburst. And in that silence there was strength. Trump's words were designed to terrify, to suffocate, to dominate. But against her, they fell like sparks against stone. The chamber could feel it, the invisible current shifting. The president had declared his war. But Jasmine's stillness, her refusal to bow, whispered of a counterstrike not yet seen. Trump sensed it too. That flicker of unease returned to his eyes, though he masked it quickly with another sneer. He pointed at her again, his voice dripping with mockery. Do you think you can stop me, Jasmine Crockett? Do you think one woman can topple an empire? The question echoed, hanging heavy. The lawmakers leaned in, waiting. The nation held its breath. And for a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. Then Jasmine shifted in her chair, slowly, deliberately. She did not speak yet. She simply raised her head, her eyes burning with a quiet fire. It was enough. Enough to tell the chamber and the world that the battle had only just begun. History was still watching, and the storm was far from over. Then Jasmine Crockett rose. She didn't rise with haste, nor with trembling hands. She rose with the measured calm of someone who understood the weight of the moment, someone who carried not just her own name, but the voices of millions who had been silenced. The chamber seemed to tilt as she stood. All eyes, once pinned to the president, now shifted toward her. Every lens, every camera turned. Trump smirked, expecting a falter. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, confident that his words had broken her before she even began. But Jasmine did not falter. She stepped forward, one hand resting gently on the desk before her, and when she spoke, her voice rang steady, unshaken, cutting through the oppressive silence like the toll of a bell. The truth, she said, each syllable deliberate, never bows to power. The words lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. A ripple surged through the chamber. Gasps, murmurs, even the faint clatter of a pen falling from a trembling hand. Her voice carried not only across the chamber, but beyond it, through the cameras, into the living rooms of Americans who sat glued to their televisions, into the minds of those who had longed for someone, anyone, to stand against the storm. Trump's smile wavered, just slightly, but enough. Jasmine held his gaze, her posture straight, her eyes locked with his. It wasn't anger that burned there, but conviction. And conviction is the one thing arrogance cannot extinguish. You call me a liar, she continued, her voice rising. You call me weak. You call me nothing. She paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. But I stand here not for myself. I stand for the mothers who have buried their sons in a system rigged against them. I stand for the workers whose voices have been drowned by greed. I stand for the people who were told to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay invisible. The chamber stirred. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others glancing nervously at one another. Something was shifting. The tide was turning. And tonight, Jasmine declared, her voice swelling with fire, they will not be invisible. They will not be silenced. Not by you. Not by anyone. Not ever again. Applause broke out. Not loud, not yet, but scattered, hesitant, like the first raindrops of a storm. A few lawmakers clapped, then more, and then the sound swelled into a roar that shook the chamber. Trump slammed his hand down on the podium, his face flushing red, his jaw clenched. "Order!" he barked, but his voice was drowned beneath the rising swell of applause and cheers. The cameras caught everything: the president's fury, Jasmine's defiance, the chamber breaking free of fear. Millions watching at home felt their own hearts surge, felt the crack in the wall of silence widening. Jasmine raised her hand, and the chamber quieted once more. Her voice softened, but every word still rang clear. "Mr. President, you believe this Congress belongs to you. You believe this nation bows at your feet. But the truth is simple. This chamber belongs to the people. This nation belongs to the people. And no amount of shouting, no amount of fear, no amount of threats will ever change that." Her words hung in the air, weighty and immovable. It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a claim to something deeper, something sacred. Trump leaned forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the podium. His eyes blazed with fury, but beneath the rage there was something else. The flicker of recognition that Jasmine's words were not just sound, but substance. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash another barrage of insults. But Jasmine cut him off, her voice slicing through his growl like lightning. "You may command armies. You may control headlines. You may hold the title of president, but you will never own the truth. And the truth is here now, standing before you, refusing to bow." The chamber erupted again, this time louder, stronger, unstoppable. The applause rolled like thunder. Trump slammed the podium once more, his voice straining against the roar. "Silence! You will obey me." But the words fell flat. They echoed, yes, but they echoed in a chamber that no longer trembled in fear. Jasmine stood tall, her face unshaken, her eyes locked on him. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. The president was no longer the conqueror. He was the cornered. And the nation could see it. Across the country, televisions replayed Jasmine's words. "The truth never bows to power." Clipped, shared, spread like wildfire. It was more than a line. It was a battle cry. And in the chamber, where history was being written second by second, Jasmine Crockett had just fired the first shot. Trump's fury boiled. His fists shook. His face was a mask of rage. But it didn't matter, because for the first time that night, he had been silenced. Not by force, not by fear, but by truth. The storm had shifted. The battlefield was no longer his. And Jasmine, alone, defiant, unyielding, was just getting started. She reached beneath her desk. The chamber hushed instantly, every eye locked on her movements. From the folder in her hand, she lifted a document bound with a red seal. Not a flimsy paper, not a rumor, an official record, a weapon. She held it high, letting the cameras zoom, letting the world see the emblem of authority stamped across the top. "The people have been lied to," she declared, her voice firm, resonant. "And tonight, I will show them the truth you've buried." The chamber erupted in a wave of sound, gasps, murmurs, the rapid click of journalists' keyboards firing like machine guns. Flashes burst from cameras. The chamber, once suffocated by silence, now trembled with electricity. Trump stiffened. His jaw tightened. "Sit down," he barked, his voice ricocheting against marble walls. "Fake! Fake news! More garbage from the radical left!" But even as his words crashed into the air, his eyes betrayed him. Just for a flicker, just for a second, the smirk faltered. A tremor ran across his face, a shadow of unease he couldn't quite hide. Jasmine saw it, and so did the nation. She laid the document on the podium before her, hands steady. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is a sealed record of financial transactions. Offshore accounts. Secret funnels of money tied to corporations that do not exist, except on paper. And every path, every dollar, every hidden trail leads back. To you, Mr. President." The chamber exploded. Senators shifted uneasily. Representatives murmured aloud. Journalists shouted over one another, demanding copies, demanding answers. Trump pounded the podium with his fist. "Lies!" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. "This is a hoax, another witch hunt. You people never stop." But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice cut through his outburst, calm and cold. Tell me, Mr. President, how does a man who claims to fight for the people hide millions in shell companies overseas? How does a man who shouts about patriotism funnel money through shadows? Her words struck like hammers against stone. The chamber shook with every syllable. Trump leaned forward, pointing a trembling finger at her. You think anyone believes you? You think these papers mean anything? I am the law here. His shout echoed, but it no longer dominated. The room was no longer bending to him. The balance was shifting, moment by moment, word by word. Lawmakers whispered furiously among themselves. Some scribbled notes. Others leaned into one another, eyes wide, the weight of revelation pressing down on them. And beyond the chamber, millions watched in breathless silence. Screens across America lit with Jasmine's defiance, with the sight of a woman daring to hold up proof against a man who claimed untouchable power. She pressed forward, each word slow, deliberate, merciless. For years, you've shouted fake news. For years, you've mocked the truth. But paper does not lie. Numbers do not lie. And tonight, America will see the cracks in the mask you wear. The chamber thundered with voices, some cheering, some shouting in rage, all caught in the storm that had finally broken. Trump's face flushed crimson, his fists trembling against the podium. He snarled the words again, his old shield, his crumbling weapon. Fake news! Fake news! But the cameras didn't see power anymore. They saw desperation. The flicker in his eyes was no longer hidden. The nation saw it. The world saw it. For the first time in years, Donald Trump looked afraid. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her voice dropping, steady as a blade pressed against skin. You can shout all you want, Mr. President, but tonight, shouting won't save you. Not from the truth. Not from history. Her words landed like a verdict. The chamber felt it. The country felt it. Trump recoiled, shoulders tense, mouth twitching with fury he could not contain. The smirk was gone. The confidence fractured. And in that fracture, in that single moment of visible fear, the empire he had built began to tremble. Cameras zoomed tight, catching the sweat glistening on his brow, the twitch in his jaw, the forced rage that could not mask the crack running through his armor. The reporters shouted louder now, their voices overlapping, demanding statements, demanding explanations. But Trump had none. Only denial, only rage. Jasmine stood calm, her hand resting on the sealed document. In that silence, in that defiance, the chamber shifted again. And across America, millions whispered the same thought. This is the beginning of the end. The first crack had appeared, and once a crack is born, it only grows. Trump knew it. He felt it gnawing at him like rot beneath a gilded surface. And so he did what he had always done when cornered. He attacked. You're pathetic, Jasmine, he spat, his voice sharp, cutting through the air like broken glass. A little nobody, pretending to be a hero. You wouldn't even be in this chamber if not for the pity of those who wanted a token voice, a token face. The words hung heavy, venomous, dripping with the ugliness of history. The chamber recoiled, a collective gasp surging like a wave. Jasmine did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on him, steady, unyielding. Trump pressed harder, sensing weakness where there was none. You think you scare me? You think you matter? You are nothing but a stain on this institution, a clown in a borrowed seat. The smirk returned, brittle and forced. His insults fired like arrows, desperate, relentless. But Jasmine did not flinch. She let him speak, let him vomit his fury until the chamber itself seemed to choke on the venom. Then she stepped forward. Mr. President, she began, her voice calm, measured but carrying the steel of a blade. You've spent your life using insults as weapons. You've built a kingdom of fear, intimidation, and lies. But here's the truth you cannot erase. She lifted the sealed document again, pressing it flat on the podium. This is law, not rhetoric, not insults. Law. The chamber stirred again, the rhythm of the moment shifting back to her. Cameras zoomed, pens scribbled furiously. Trump bared his teeth. Lies! Fraud! You don't know the first thing about law. Jasmine's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, an expression not of joy, but of certainty. I studied law when you were bankrupting casinos, Mr. President. I practiced law while you were dodging subpoenas. And tonight I stand here armed not with words but with proof. The chamber erupted with murmurs, a rising current building beneath her voice. She pressed on, relentless. You want to call me a nobody? Fine. But this nobody has evidence of financial misconduct, conflicts of interest, and violations that would bury any other citizen under the weight of prison walls. You've hidden behind your title long enough. The law doesn't care about your insults. The law doesn't bend to your ego. And the law is coming for you. The words struck like lightning. The chamber quaked. Lawmakers slammed hands on desks in thunderous applause, their voices rising in unison. Trump's face flushed crimson. His fists pounded the podium. You will regret this, he shouted, his voice breaking against the storm of noise. You will regret the day you ever spoke my name. But Jasmine raised her hand, and the chamber fell quiet once more. She looked at him not with anger, but with an unshakable calm that was more powerful than rage. History is not kind to tyrants, Mr. President, she said softly, her words carrying with deadly clarity. And your name will not be remembered as strength. It will be remembered as corruption, deception, and fear. And tonight, before this nation, you cannot hide behind insults. Not anymore. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of judgment, of truth settling into the marrow of the room. Trump shook his head violently, his voice hoarse, spitting words like poison. You don't have the courage. You don't have the strength. You don't have... But Jasmine cut across him like thunder. I have what you will never possess. Integrity. The chamber exploded. Applause thundered. Lawmakers stood, fists slamming desks, their voices carrying like the roar of a people rising from silence. Cameras caught it all. The fury on Trump's face, the fire in Jasmine's eyes. The chamber transformed into an arena no longer under his control. The war of words was no longer his performance. It was her battlefield now. Trump leaned over the podium, his voice cracking with fury. You will be destroyed, he shouted, spit flying from his lips. You will be crushed like every fool who's dared to cross me. But the chamber was too loud, the applause too strong, the tide too far gone. And Jasmine, standing tall against the storm, let the roar of truth drown his threats. When the noise settled, she spoke again, her voice steady, resolute. You wanted obedience. You wanted silence. But what you've created tonight is resistance. And resistance, Mr. President, is something you can't control. Her words echoed, carried by the chamber, carried by the cameras, carried by the nation itself. The war of words had reached its crescendo, and with every blow, every syllable, every truth laid bare, Trump's empire of fear cracked deeper, louder, wider. The chamber thundered like a battlefield. Every slam of a hand against a desk was a drumbeat of rebellion. Every cheer was a nail driven into the coffin of tyranny. And in the heart of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood unbroken, wielding truth like a sword. The storm raged on, and its fury was no longer Trump's to command. His words had failed to crush her. His insults had shattered against the steel of her resolve. And so, with desperation boiling in his veins, Donald Trump turned to the lowest weapon left in his arsenal. He went after her blood. You talk about truth, Jasmine, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. But let's talk about your father. The chamber froze. The air thickened instantly as though a blade had been drawn across the room. Trump leaned forward, savoring the silence, his eyes narrowing with cruel delight. A failed man, a drunk, a disgrace. That's the blood you come from. That's your legacy. Weakness runs in your veins. Gas rippled through the chamber like shockwaves. Lawmakers stiffened, some exchanging horrified glances, others shrinking into their seats. The audacity was staggering, even for Trump. He pressed harder, his voice rising with twisted satisfaction. Your father was no hero. He was a cautionary tale, a man who stumbled through life and left nothing behind but shame. And you, he jabbed a finger at her, You carry that shame into this chamber every time you open your mouth." The words hung like poison, seeping into every corner of the room. Reporters gaped, their pens frozen mid-scribble. Even seasoned politicians who had weathered decades of insults sat in stunned silence. Trump's smirk widened. For the first time that night, he believed he had struck true. He believed he had found the crack in her armor. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not speak. She did not lash back in fury. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately to the desk before her, and she lifted the Constitution. The leather binding caught the chamber lights, its weight solid in her grip. Her fingers pressed tight around it, not trembling, not faltering. Her eyes rose to meet his, cold, steady, unbroken. Eyes that did not mirror pain, but resolve. Eyes that told him and the world that his words had missed their mark. Trump's smirk faltered, just for a second. The chamber held its breath, the silence sharp as glass. Jasmine stepped forward, the Constitution held close against her chest like a shield and a sword all at once. Her voice, when it came, was low, measured, but carved from stone. "You can drag my father's name through the dirt, Mr. President. You can insult his struggles, his flaws, his scars." Her gaze swept the chamber, pulling every pair of eyes to her. "But know this, his fight, his suffering, his humanity is why I stand here today. Because unlike you, he did not hide his flaws behind money and lies. He faced them, he endured them, and he raised a daughter who would never bend to men like you." The silence cracked. A low murmur rippled through the lawmakers, voices rising, desks shifting. She raised the Constitution higher, her hand steady. "This is what he taught me, that no man, no tyrant, no bully, no so-called president stands above this, above the law, above the people, above justice." The chamber erupted in applause, loud, thunderous, defiant applause that rolled like thunder through the marble halls. Trump slammed his fist against the podium, his face burning red, his mouth spitting rage. "Liar! Weak little liar! You think waving a book makes you strong? You're pathetic." But his words were drowned beneath the roar. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, social feeds across the nation exploded with clips of Jasmine holding the Constitution high, her words already etched into history. "No man stands above this." The phrase trended instantly. In the chamber, Jasmine did not waver. Her eyes remained locked on Trump, unflinching, unyielding. And for the first time, it was clear to everyone watching. The insults had lost their sting. The president's fury had lost its grip. She lowered the Constitution slowly, her voice dropping again to that cold, steady calm. "You call my father weak. You call me pathetic. But the only thing pathetic here is a man so terrified of truth that he hides behind cruelty, that he claws at the dead because he cannot defeat the living." The chamber shook with another wave of applause, louder than before. Lawmakers pounding desks, voices rising in defiance. Trump's face contorted, his words reduced to snarls and half-screams, his control unraveling before the eyes of the world. The smirk was gone. The power was fading. And still Jasmine stood tall, the Constitution pressed firmly in her grasp, her eyes like fire. She had taken his most vicious weapon, his attack on her blood, her family, and turned it into steel, into fuel, into fire. And in that fire, the chamber saw not weakness, but strength, not shame, but defiance, not fear, but a warrior who could not be broken. The storm roared louder, fiercer, unstoppable. And for the second time that night, Donald Trump realized it was no longer his to command. Jasmine Crockett rose. She rose not as a woman under fire, not as a target of insults or cruelty. She rose as if lifted by something greater than herself, by every voice that had ever been silenced, by every hand that had ever been forced down, by every soul that had ever whispered, "Someday justice will come." The Constitution gleamed in her hand, the leather binding worn, the pages heavy with history. She raised it high, her arm unwavering, the chamber lights striking it like a blade of truth. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding. I do not stand here to protect myself. I stand here to protect the people. The chamber erupted. Lawmakers leapt to their feet, their applause crashing like thunder, their voices rising like a tidal wave. Desks rattled, cameras shook, reporters scrambled to capture every second. For the first time that night, the chamber belonged not to the president, not to his fury, but to her. Trump's face contorted with rage. He pounded the podium, shouting over the roar, but his words were swallowed by the tide. Sit down, sit down. You will not defy me in my chamber. But no one listened. The storm had shifted. The voices were no longer his to command. Jasmine lowered the Constitution just slightly, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. Every gaze followed her, drawn in, caught in the fire of her conviction. She spoke again, her words rolling like thunder through the hall. This oath, this sacred promise, is not to a man, not to a party, not to power. It is to the people, to their freedom, to their dignity, to their justice. Her hand pressed against the Constitution, firm, resolute. And I will honor that oath tonight, even if it costs me everything. A silence fell. Deep, profound, electric. The kind of silence that does not weaken, but strengthens. The kind of silence in which history itself leans closer to listen. And then the applause came again, louder, fiercer, unstoppable. It surged like a wave breaking against stone, rolling through the chamber, rolling through the nation. Millions watching at home rose to their feet, clapping at their screens, tears in their eyes, hearts pounding with the sudden, overwhelming realization that justice had found its voice. Trump's fist shook against the podium. His jaw clenched, his skin flushed with crimson fury. He bellowed, his voice breaking against the roar. You are nothing. You are a liar. You will not lead this nation. You will never defeat me. But his words rang hollow. They bounced off walls that no longer carried his echo. They shattered against a chamber that had begun to reject his grip. Jasmine did not look at him. She looked past him, through him. She looked to the lawmakers, to the cameras, to the nation beyond. Her voice dropped, steady, resolute. The people are watching, and they will remember who stood with truth and who cowered before power. Gasps rippled. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. Others bowed their heads, shame flickering across their faces. But many stood taller, as if her words had poured steel into their spines. She raised the Constitution once more, her voice swelling with fire. Tonight, this chamber must choose fear or freedom, silence or justice, tyranny or truth. The applause roared again, so loud it shook the very marble beneath their feet. Reporters shouted, microphones shoved forward, cameras flashing in a frenzy. Trump screamed over it all, his voice desperate, cracking, his power slipping like sand through clenched fists. You will pay for this. You will all pay. But the chamber did not bow. It rose. For the first time, lawmakers who had once hidden in silence joined the applause, their desks slamming in rhythm, the sound echoing like drums of revolution. A wave had begun, and Trump could not stop it. Jasmine stood at the center, her arm raised, the Constitution gleaming above her head, her voice the steady anchor in the chaos. I swear before this Congress, before this nation, and before history itself, I will not bend, I will not break. I will not betray the people I serve. Not tonight, not ever. The chamber roared in answer, their voices rising like a storm that could no longer be contained. And across the country, in homes and bars and crowded streets, millions of voices rose with them, echoing her oath, claiming it as their own. Trump's face twisted with rage, but his fury could not drown the truth. Because in that chamber, in that moment, Donald Trump was no longer the most powerful man in the room. Jasmine Crockett was, and with every word, with every vow, with every clap of thunder that shook the walls of Congress, the tide of resistance swelled higher, stronger, unstoppable. The oath had been spoken, the battle had turned, and the storm was about to break wide open. Trump's face twisted into something feral. The veins in his neck bulged, his lips curled back as he slammed both fists onto the podium with a force that shook the microphones. "Enough!" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "I've had enough of this circus." His eyes, wild and bloodshot, scanned the chamber like a predator cornered. And then he snapped. "Security!" he bellowed, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine Crockett. "Remove her! Drag her out of my chamber! Now!" The words echoed like cannon fire. Gasps rippled across the room, followed by chaos. Lawmakers shouting, reporters leaping to their feet, cameras flashing in a frenzy. Two Secret Service agents hesitated at the edge of the chamber. Their orders had come from the president himself. And yet, this was Congress. The hesitation was enough, because before they could take a single step forward, another voice cut through the storm. "Sit down, Mr. President." Tree. The words were cold, sharp, unflinching. They belonged to the Speaker of the House. He rose slowly, his gavel in hand, his eyes narrowing at Trump with the weight of authority. "This is the United States Congress," he declared, his voice steady as stone. "Not your court, not your palace, and certainly not your throne." The chamber erupted. Applause thundered. Desks slammed in rhythm. A wave of defiance surged against Trump's order. Trump's face turned scarlet. He leaned forward, spit flying as he screamed into the microphone. "You dare defy me? You dare undermine the President of the United States?" The speaker didn't blink. "This chamber answers to the Constitution," he said, striking the gavel hard. "Not to your temper." The words landed like a hammer, echoing through the marble halls. Trump slammed his fist again, the boom rattling through the chamber. The sound was primal, violent, desperate. Even the cameras trembled on their tripods. The nation watched, breathless. For decades, Americans had seen power wielded in this chamber. But never like this. Never a president screaming to have an elected representative dragged out for speaking truth. The weight of history pressed in from every side. This was no longer politics. This was raw, unmasked tyranny. Trump's voice roared again, trembling with fury. "I am the president. You will obey me." But the chamber did not bow. Lawmakers shouted back, their voices colliding in a wall of sound. Reporters shouted questions, their words lost in the storm. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett stood still. She had not moved, not flinched, not faltered. The Constitution remained clutched firmly in her hand, her posture unshaken. She looked at him, just looked. No words, no theatrics. Only eyes that cut deeper than any speech. It was that silence, that unbreakable calm, that unraveled him further. Trump pounded the podium once more, the sound reverberating like a drum of war. The wood groaned beneath his blows. The microphones screeched with static. But the noise no longer commanded the room. It only revealed his desperation. The speaker raised his gavel again, his voice rising over the chaos. "Mr. President, you are out of order." The words landed heavy, unprecedented, unthinkable. To call the President of the United States out of order on the floor of Congress. Yet it was done, and the chamber roared in approval. Trump staggered back for a moment, his chest heaving, his breath ragged. The fury in his eyes burned, but beneath it, just for a flicker, there was fear. Because he knew. He had tried to break her with insults. He had tried to break her with shame, and now he had tried to break her with force. But Jasmine Crockett remained, unbroken, defiant, a sentinel of truth standing tall in the storm. She raised the Constitution high once more, her voice clear, resonant, steady. "You may shout, you may threaten, you may pound your fists against these walls until they crack, but this chamber will not kneel, not to you, not tonight, not ever." The chamber erupted in applause so thunderous it drowned out everything else. It rolled through the marble, through the cameras, through the screens of millions watching across America. Trump's shouts were swallowed, his fists pounded in vain, his fury reduced to noise lost in the tide. Because the storm had turned against him completely. And for the first time in his reign, Donald Trump stood in Congress not as master of the room, but as a man outnumbered, outshouted, and outshined by the truth. The battle lines had hardened, The resistance had risen, and the storm was no longer about to break wide open. It already had. The chamber trembled with voices, but Jasmine Crockett raised her hand, and silence fell like a curtain. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her calm was command enough. From the folder at her desk, she drew a small black device, a recorder. The room seemed to inhale as one. Reporters leaned forward, lawmakers stiffened, cameras zoomed tight. Jasmine held it up for all to see, her voice measured, deliberate. For years, the truth has been twisted, hidden, denied. Tonight, it will be heard. Trump's eyes narrowed, his jaw twitching. He shook his head violently, already shouting before the device was even switched on. No! No, don't you dare! That's fake. That's a setup. That's illegal. But Jasmine pressed the button, and the chamber was filled with his own voice. The sound was unmistakable, deep, brash, drenched in arrogance. Donald Trump. We will bend the Constitution. Congress will obey. They will kneel to me, or they will be crushed. The words rang through the chamber, crisp and damning. A collective gasp swept across the lawmakers. Some covered their mouths. Others clutched at their desks. The press gallery erupted, flashes exploding like lightning, reporters shouting over one another in disbelief. Across the nation, televisions crackled with the recording, living rooms falling into stunned silence. Families leaned closer to their screens, hands tightening around remote controls, eyes widening. A president, on tape, promising to break the very foundation of the republic. Trump lunged forward, pounding the podium with both fists. Fake! Spliced! Edited! This is an attack, a witch hunt, a damn fabrication. But his voice, raw and frantic, only underscored the truth, because the voice in the recording was his, undeniable, inescapable. The chamber erupted in chaos. Lawmakers shouted, some demanding order, others calling for immediate action. Reporters screamed questions, their voices overlapping, rising, deafening. Jasmine did not flinch. She stood tall, her hands steady on the recorder, her eyes fixed on the man unraveling before her. This is not speculation. This is not rumor, she declared, her voice slicing through the storm. This recording comes from a former senior aide, someone who stood at your side, who heard your words, who could no longer stay silent while you conspired against the very nation you swore to serve. Her words struck like thunder. The floor of Congress shook not from fists this time, but from the weight of revelation. Trump's face turned a deeper shade of crimson. He screamed again, but his words were lost, drowned beneath the roar of voices surging against him. Jasmine pressed forward, her voice rising with the fire of conviction. You wanted obedience. You wanted submission. You wanted to twist the foundation of this republic into your personal weapon. But tonight, the mask has slipped, and America has heard you in your own voice. The chamber thundered with applause, the desks rattling like drums of war. Reporters scrambled, phones lighting up, headlines already racing across the globe. Trump on tape, we will bend the Constitution. The president's own words expose him. Across America, the silence of living rooms broke into gasps, into shouts, into disbelief. Some wept, some cursed. Many simply sat frozen, the weight of history pressing down, because there was no walking back what had been spoken. No denial strong enough, no insult sharp enough, no rage loud enough to erase the sound of his own voice condemning him. Trump staggered back from the podium, his body trembling, his breath ragged. His hands gripped the edges of the wood as if to keep himself upright. For the first time, the great showman had no script. No performance could save him. Jasmine lowered the recorder, her voice steady, cold as judgment. You may call it fake. You may scream until your voice breaks. But the people have heard you, and history will not forget. The chamber roared once more, louder than ever, a sound like the crumbling of walls long thought unbreakable. Trump's mouth opened, but no words came. Only silence. Only the hollow mask of a man who had been caught, stripped, exposed. Jasmine's gaze did not waver. Her hand pressed the Constitution against her chest again, and she spoke one final line that pierced through the noise like lightning splitting the sky. You wanted Congress to kneel. Tonight it will rise. And with that, the chamber stood. Every lawmaker, every voice, rising in defiance, their applause shaking the very foundations of the Capitol. Across the nation, millions rose too, in their homes, in crowded bars, on street corners. They rose because the truth had been spoken. And for the first time in that dark chamber, it was no longer Trump's voice that defined the night. It was hers. Trump could not bear it. His face twisted, his lips trembling with rage, his fist pounding against the podium like a beast in a cage. The great showman, the self-proclaimed master of the stage, was unraveling before the eyes of the world. "You think this makes you strong?" he bellowed, his voice cracking, raw with fury. "You think you've won? You are nothing, Jasmine. Nothing." The chamber froze, the silence pierced only by the thunder of his voice. But he did not stop. "You are a liar, a fraud, a disgrace," he screamed, spit flying from his mouth, veins bulging at his temples. "You don't belong in this chamber. You don't belong in my America." He jabbed a finger toward her, shaking with rage. "You will regret the day you ever dared to stand against me. You will regret the day you ever spoke my name." Reporters scrambled to capture every second, their cameras clicking in a frenzy. Television screens across the nation lit with his unfiltered fury, every word transmitted into homes, bars, and streets. And for the first time, millions saw not the polished politician, not the rally showman, not the president, but the tyrant. Trump spun toward the cameras, his eyes wild, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "You hear me, America?" he roared, pointing straight into the lens. "They want to destroy your president. They want to destroy you. But I will not let it happen. I will crush them. I will bend them. I will make them pay." The words echoed like thunder, but they carried no strength. They carried only fear, only desperation. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Lawmakers looked on in horror, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. This was no longer power. It was the tantrum of a man exposed. The speaker's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order!" he shouted, his voice straining to break through the chaos. But Trump would not be silenced. He pounded the podium again, his voice rising higher, hoarser, desperate. "They will all bow," he screamed. "This Congress will kneel before me." The chamber erupted. Shouts of outrage, voices calling for calm, desks slamming in protest. It was pandemonium, history spinning into chaos before the eyes of the nation. Security shifted closer, their black suits moving like shadows toward the podium. Their earpieces crackled, their eyes locked on the man who was supposed to be their protectee, but who now threatened the very order they were sworn to guard. Trump caught sight of them, and his fury only deepened. "Don't you dare touch me!" he shrieked, pointing at the approaching agents. "I am the president. You work for me. You will not lay a hand on me." But the chamber was no longer his domain. It was no longer his stage. And even the men sworn to protect him hesitated, torn between duty and chaos. Jasmine stood silent, unflinching, the Constitution still clutched in her hand. Her calm only enraged him further. He turned back to her, his voice breaking into a rasp. "You think you're a hero? You think this country will follow you? They will spit on you. They will laugh at you. You are nothing." The chamber roared back, not in support of him, but in defiance. Lawmakers shouted, their voices clashing with his. "Order! Enough! Sit down!" But Trump could not. He would not. His fists slammed again and again into the podium, the wood groaning under the assault. His face shone with sweat, his tie askew, his hair wild, his breath ragged. It was not strength on display, it was collapse. The speaker rose again, slamming his gavel so hard it echoed like gunfire. "Mr. President, you are out of order." The chamber shook with applause, voices rising to drown out the president's fury. Reporters shouted over one another, their headlines already forming. "Trump loses control on Congress floor. President meltdown captured on live TV." Across the nation, viewers sat in stunned silence. Some gasped, some shouted at their screens. But all saw the same thing, the mask ripped away, The tyrant laid bare. Security moved closer now, their hands raised cautiously, their voices low but firm. "Mr. President, please, step back." Trump roared again, his voice shaking, broken. "No, no one touches me. No one removes me. This is my America. Mine." But his words rang hollow, his power slipping like sand through clenched fists. He was no longer the master of the chamber. He was a man unraveling, cornered by truth, exposed before history. And as security closed in, as the speaker's gavel thundered, as the chamber roared in defiance, one truth became undeniable. Donald Trump had lost control, not just of the chamber, not just of the storm, but of himself. The chamber roared with chaos, applause clashing with shouts, gavel slamming against marble, security edging closer to a president unraveling before the eyes of the world. And then, in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett moved. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, unshaken. Her heels clicked once against the polished floor, a sound so sharp it sliced through the storm. The chamber hushed, as if the room itself leaned closer to listen. Trump's head jerked toward her, his chest heaving, sweat glistening across his brow. His mouth opened, desperate to hurl another insult, another scream, another denial. But she didn't give him the chance. Her voice cut clean through the silence. Cold, calm, final. "Quit your BS, Mr. President." The words cracked like a whip, sharp and merciless. The chamber gasped, half in shock, half in awe. She took another step closer, her eyes locked on his, steady as steel. "You've just written your own indictment." The chamber exploded. A roar like thunder shook the walls. Lawmakers pounding their desks, their voices rising in unison, echoing like war drums. Reporters leapt from their seats, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, desperate to capture every syllable of the historic moment. Trump staggered back, his face frozen in disbelief. For the first time that night, his mouth moved, but no words came out. Jasmine's voice rang again, riding the wave of applause, rising above the storm. "You wanted obedience. You wanted silence. You wanted this chamber to bow. But what you've done, Mr. President, is expose yourself before the very people you tried to control. You've handed them the proof. You've handed them the verdict. You've handed them history." The chamber thundered with cheers. Some lawmakers stood, fists pounding against their desks in rhythm, their voices joining the roar. Others raised their hands high, the sound swelling into something more than noise, into defiance, into rebellion, into freedom. Across America, television shook with the roar of the chamber. Millions at home shouted, clapped, wept, their voices rising with hers. The moment surged beyond the walls of Congress, spilling into streets, bars, and homes, a collective cry that echoed across the nation. Trump's face twisted, his eyes darting wildly, his fists clenched white. He pounded the podium again, his voice hoarse, desperate, broken. "Lies, all lies. She's nothing. She's nothing." But his words fell flat. They were drowned in the roar of truth, because the chamber no longer listened, the nation no longer believed, and the storm no longer obeyed him. Jasmine raised the Constitution once more, her hands steady, her voice carrying like thunder across the hall. "This is not my indictment, Mr. President. It is yours. Written by your words, sealed by your lies, and delivered by your own hand." The chamber shook again with applause, louder than before, unstoppable. The speaker's gavel pounded, but even he could not contain the wave. It was not disorder. It was history. Trump slumped slightly against the podium, his shoulders sagging, his eyes darting desperately across the chamber. But everywhere he looked, he saw faces turned against him. Faces no longer cowed, faces no longer afraid. Jasmine's eyes never left him. Her silence now was heavier than any insult, sharper than any accusation. She had said the words that would outlive him, words that would echo through history long after the storm had passed. The chamber belonged to her, the moment belonged to her, and the truth, undeniable and unbreakable, belonged to the people. The roar continued, a living tide that could not be silenced. And in its midst, Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, stood small, diminished, undone. For the first time in his life, he was not the author of the show. He was the subject of the verdict. And Jasmine Crockett had delivered the finishing blow. The chamber quaked with noise, but then the speaker's gavel struck, sharp as thunder. "Order! This chamber will now come to order!" The roar dimmed, replaced by a tense silence that prickled across the skin of every person present, for everyone knew what came next. The speaker's voice was solemn, weighty, final. In light of the evidence presented, in light of the recording we have all heard with our own ears, this Congress will proceed to an immediate vote to open articles of impeachment. Gasps broke across the room. The words hit like a hammer blow, shaking the foundations of power. Trump's head snapped up. His eyes widened, darting desperately across the chamber, searching for allies. But none came. He sat frozen, lips parted, his breath shallow, his face pale beneath the sweat. For the first time in his reign, the smirk was gone. The mask was gone. The arrogance was gone. What remained was a man stripped bare, a man cornered by his own words, by his own greed, by his own hubris. The speaker raised his gavel once more. Those in favor of initiating impeachment proceedings signify by standing. And then it happened. One by one, lawmakers rose from their seats. First a few, then a row, then a wave, until the chamber stood, nearly unanimous, an ocean of bodies defying the man who only moments ago had demanded their obedience. Applause broke out, rolling like thunder, shaking the marble, shaking the air, shaking the very walls of history. The verdict was not yet written in law, but it was written in spirit. Donald Trump had been condemned by his own Congress. Trump sat motionless, his hands limp on the podium, his eyes vacant. The fury was gone. The fire was gone. Only silence remained, an emptiness that hollowed him out before the eyes of the nation. Millions watched on television, stunned into quiet awe. They had seen him roar. They had seen him rage. They had seen him dominate, but they had never seen him like this. Small, shaken, beaten. Jasmine Crockett did not smile. There was no gloating, no triumph in her eyes. Only resolve. She closed the folder, lowered the Constitution gently, and turned from the podium. Her heels clicked against the floor, slow, steady, unhurried. The chamber parted for her as she walked. Lawmakers stepping aside, their eyes following her with reverence. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing, desperate to capture her every step. She walked not as a victor basking in conquest, but as a soldier carrying the weight of justice. At the door of the chamber, light poured in, bright, golden, unyielding. It caught her shoulders, her face, her figure, wrapping her in a glow that seemed almost holy. She paused only once, glancing back at the chamber, at the man slumped in defeat, at the lawmakers who had finally found their voice. Her eyes did not linger long. She had done what she came to do. And then she stepped forward, out of the chamber, into the blaze of light. The cameras followed, spilling her image across every screen in America. The lone figure who had faced the storm and emerged unbroken. The warrior who had stood against tyranny with nothing but truth in her hand. Outside, crowds erupted into cheers, voices rising like a chorus that shook the city itself. The chant spread through the streets, through the air, through the hearts of millions watching at home. Justice! 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 And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the embodiment of defiance, the living symbol that justice, however fragile, however battered, could still triumph over darkness. Trump remained behind, slumped in his chair, staring at the desk before him. His empire of fear was cracking. His legacy was collapsing. His reign was ending. And the world had seen it unfold live, minute by minute, word by word, until nothing remained but silence. Jasmine did not look back again. The light carried her forward, her figure etched against the brilliance, her steps steady and unafraid. The chamber had chosen. The nation had seen. History had turned. And as the doors closed behind her, one truth rang louder than all the rest. Justice had won, and the storm had passed. But the lesson endures beyond the chamber walls. True strength is not found in the loudest voice or the heaviest fist. It is found in the quiet courage to stand for what is right, even when the world shakes against you. History reminds us that power built on fear will always crumble, while truth, however fragile, can outlast the tempests of tyranny. And when one person dares to rise, holding integrity like a torch, they light a path for countless others to follow. If this story shook you, don't just move on. Carry it, share it. Let it start a conversation. Like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes justice can rise even in the darkest rooms. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth stands tall and no lie goes unanswered. Hit the bell, because the next storm is coming, and it won't just entertain you. It will challenge you. It will test what you believe about power, fear, and courage. This story is a fictional dramatization, rooted in real injustice, real abuse of power, and the timeless fight for truth. Any resemblance to actual figures is coincidental, or symbolic for reflection and critique. Thanks for watching. Justice doesn't whisper, it roars. This is Harrison Stories.